properties. All this information and the details of it are available in this document, which is also accessible via all the other links that Paul mentioned to you earlier. Next slide, please. Right, so here again, just a couple more examples. Solar irradiance has changed. More details also available through this website, plus on our documents page. Again, these changes have been driven by changes in data sources and the methodologies that have been used to derive this data set. Next, please. And similarly for greenhouse gas concentrations, Zeb can tell you more, but so there are changes, but not very, very big in comparison to all the other, some of the other data sets that we are seeing. I can tell you that at GFDL, when we run with CMIP6 plus, actually, the change in the radiative balance in response to these greenhouse gases was minimal, barely visible to the naked eye in comparison to CMIP6. And so some of the changes are also listed and, of course, described much more in detail in the documents. Next, please. And I think I'm handing off. So there are some additional information that is specific to these forcings data sets that we have been working on and providing in response to the discussions that have happened over the past 1 year, and especially the ones that we highlighted in the workshop in last October. So for biomass burning emissions, we will be providing an additional smoothed biomass burning emission time series to address the discontinuity in the interannual variability going from pre to satellite era. This data set is expected at the end of March 2025. And the expectation is that modeling centers that do want to use this data, they can use the smooth data as compared to the interannually varying data set for the post or during the satellite time period. And this was initiated because of the work coming out of CMIP6 using one of the model CSM that shows that the biomass burning aerosol forcings were overestimated, actually underestimated when you use highly interannual varying biomass burning emissions. So that's an option. And then for volcanic SO2 emissions and aerosol optical properties, there was request to provide some additional concentration variables, which are being provided. And additionally, as you will read through in Tom's detailed documentation, some of the changes in the pre-satellite era that we see in the CMIP7 dataset is due to addressing some of the small eruptions, discontinuity from pre to satellite era using different proxy data sets. For land use change, there were some data spikes since 1950, which were related to the height data set that is used to derive this data set, and that has been addressed using temporal smoothing. Just as Paul mentioned, the data set is just being uploaded or being made available. There was a request for population density data set by the global modelers, especially those who want to simulate fire missions interactively, and that the options for providing historical and scenarios are being explored, and hopefully we'll have a data provider or a couple of data providers towards the end of this month after a meeting that is planned. Ozone concentration. So here again, there is an expectation of high frequency data set that is again going to be provided as an option for modelers to better capture the natural variability. Next, please. Handing off to you, Zeb. Thanks.
Thanks, Vaishali. So we thought, obviously, people have got quite a lot to deal with historical and pre-industrial control runs, but we thought we should at least touch on the scenarios while we're here. So our plan for CMIP7 scenario MIP data is to release these first data sets for testing in April. And I see that Yamo's already jumped into the Padlet with some extra comments there. So thank you to Yamo. And if you've got any further follow-ups, please jump into the Padlet and have a look, or just jump on GitHub and ask away there as well. In particular, we're really looking for volunteer ESM teams who want to provide feedback on the files, just to check file formats, how are things looking, do they behave, do they run in a model? That would be very, very helpful for us to get some feedback and make sure that we're producing something that's useful for the entire community. So if you're interested in volunteering, then please reach out. We expect the final scenarios to be selected in May, roughly. May, roughly. And then it'll take roughly 2 months to get the data crunched all the way through the workflow so that we can put it on the ESGF in July. Selection of scenarios is a separate process from our input for MIP's forcings task team. So if you want to get involved in that, you need to find someone else to talk to. But for information, the proposal from the paper is on the right, and there's a whole scenario MIP team who are thinking about what the best way to create the scenarios are and to pick the scenarios and what space should be covered. Final ozone and other dependent sets will obviously follow from the rest of the scenario data. Their timeline's still being confirmed. I'm not sure if Michaela's on the call or not, but we can also put that in the Padlet if you've got questions, and then I can follow up with her afterwards. And then same as for historical and PI control, the data will be released via input from MIPS. Initially, as Paul said, under the CMIP6 Plus MIP era, and then under CMIP7 once they're finalized. And then, consistent with CMIP6, each scenario will be released under its own source ID. So you'll get these kind of long scenario names where you'll have institution bits and then the scenario name and then a version ID. The exact details of the scenario naming is still under discussion as part of the scenario MIP process, from what I understand, but we'll confirm that as soon as we've got a better understanding of how it'll work. And the naming scheme isn't 100% perfect necessarily. We did discuss potentially changing it to make it a bit easier to work with, but we decided to put the pause on that and leave it for CMIP 8 probably, just because of the impact it would have on downstream users. So I think we can go to the next slide, Eleanor. And so I'll just round out with a couple of points on communication. So all of our update activity to the data sets that are available and kind of metadata beyond what's available on ESGF is being captured in this GitHub repository, which you see the link of at the top. We will try and do a new release of this repository every time a new data set comes in, and that release information will contain links to discussions and issues and other bits and pieces so you can follow along. And then obviously that platform is there to make discussions as you start to use the data and find things that are worth noting. If there's any questions, please fire away. If we go to the next slide, I'll just point out that you can subscribe to events at different levels of detail. So probably for most people here, the releases are going to be of most interest, maybe also the discussions. But if you really want to follow along with everything that's happening on the repository, then you can subscribe to other events like issues being created or pull requests as well. And I think with that, I get the privilege of saying thank you to everyone for your attention, and then we can move on to questions, I think.
So open for questions if people have any or comments. If you want to put your hand up in the in WebEx, I'll try and keep track of who's asking what. Paul, I think you got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so sorry, I've got like 2 microphone settings on my laptop, so it's sometimes a bit iffy as to whether or not people can hear me on these sorts of calls. Yeah, so I'll briefly explain what my situation is and just ask for advice on how to go about doing that. I'm working at Access NRI, and my task is to create or recreate the scripts that go from the CMIP7 forcings to the model input data, starting from the point of possibly having some of the scripts that went from the CMIP6 forcings to the previous model input data was used in the access projects. The complication is that some of the processing was actually done at the Met Office. So at the moment, I'm trying to pull together all of the documentation having to do with what processing was done, starting from which file going to where. If there was a summary of what the technical differences are between each of the data sets, that would be useful in terms of like the number of files that are necessary to ingest, the number of fields that are contained in the CMIP6 versus CMIP7, and whether there's any differences in the field names and things like that. Stuff that is more of interest to people who are writing scripts and less of interest to people who are scientists trying to interpret the data. That would be extremely useful. Does that exist?
In short, yes, but you're gonna have to do a little bit of work to get to it. I mean, the way that one of the things that we tried to do as much as we can is follow the templates that we had in CMIP6, because of the fact that exactly the experience you're talking about is something that many folks are dealing with. I mean, Vaishali's pointed this out quite a number of times, because at GFDL, they're actually trying to pick up, these new data sets and run with them. In many instances, what you'll find is that there is a direct comparison file, CMIP7 file, to what was there in CMIP6. In some instances, for example, Solaris HEPA existed back in CMIP6, and that exists again with a different version number this time around again. Many of the data sets have been updated and overhauled from beginning to end. Tom's volcanic data, for example, is very different to what we had previously. I think he's really done an excellent job with his team to kind of, produce something that we've got a far better idea of where it's come from and what it captures. And so there are going to be situations like the volcanic where you're actually going to have to more or less start again. But that's not going to be the case across things like SEDS and some of the other data products that are copying, well, very, very closely copying the templates that we had previously. There have been situations where some of the kind of quirks we've caught and we've been able to change them. So, for example, underscores versus hyphens in file names, etc. Those kind of little quirks are something that you're going to hit pretty quickly in a script, and it's going to be a matter of just changing from one format to another format. There is nowhere that we've captured all of that information, because there are quite a large number of files. The way that I would approach it, if I was in your position, is I'd go and find our download documentation page, make a replication of the archive, so you've got every single file that you want to pay attention to in a directory structure, and then start building scripts that actually start using that kind of directory structure to guide things. I fully expect that we're going to get updates which will then supplement that directory structure with with an updated version of those data sets in a directory tree. And so that would be like, to actually kind of get into a situation where you're operationally kind of using this, that would be the way that I do it. The other thing would be, if in a situation that there's been usage of data that another modeling group has used, I would personally open a discussion on GitHub and see if you can engage with people that did this previously and figure out if there's some way of sharing the load. I know with NCAR and the E3SM model over here in the US, there was quite a significant sharing of different forcing data sets across those two teams. And I'd be surprised if the Met Office and Access don't have a very similar situation as well. And so I think, again, like, you're trying to use the comms methods that we actually have to try and kick this off. You might find issues, for example, that you can identify, and we can try and get those fixed before somebody else encounters them. And the more that we can do this systematically as a community, I think the better off we are. So that it doesn't really give you an answer to the question, but I mean, once you have the files, in a file system, you can start interrogating them programmatically, which is the way that I do it.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, so we've already started replicating the files into the file system. We just have to have a systematic way of keeping them updated, because at the moment it's ad hoc. And as far as talking to the Met Office, yes, we started that discussion quite a while ago, and we have fairly advanced plans to do some sort of exchange of expertise and to keep in touch with each other.
So there's
Well, can I say
I'll
one
drop
thing?
in. Sorry, was that you,
Oh,
Zeb?
that was me, yeah. I was just going to say,
Yeah.
one other thing I would say is, so on some of the data sets, like on the greenhouse gas concentration data set page, there is actually a mapping from the old names to the new names. If you find there's a difference in the naming, please create an issue on GitHub and we will try and get that information onto the documentation pages so that everyone can use it. That will make it a lot easier for people, I think. And we have tried to put all of that information on GitHub already, where there's changes in file formats, changes in temporal resolution, changes in spatial stuff between the two, between CMIP6 and CMIP7. So if there are things missing, please make an issue on GitHub and then add in there.
Yeah, especially interested in things like changes in units or changes in some sort of semantics of what the fields mean.
I mean, one of the things that I'd say is if you encounter something that isn't documented, feel free to let us know and we'll try and pull that into the doc. So it means we can build this together, because the more eyeballs that we have on these data sets, the better off we are and the more comprehensive we can describe them. I would strongly recommend that like what Zeb pointed out in the chat, there's actually a link to his mapping. So what you'll see is that there were these very long file names, very descriptive, but they've been shortened to something that again is pretty identifiable, I think, and it's cleaned things up a fair bit just to deal with much shorter file names. It then also means that kind of writing things out, you don't have 30 characters, you've only got 3 or maybe 5 or something, which makes it a bit easier to deal with. So we do have a lot of information that's building, but I mean, the more information that other folks can contribute into us, that would be excellent, and we're happy to capture that, package it up, and put it on the documentation page. So we've got a couple of the hands up. Did you have anything else to add there, Paul, or you good? Okay, we'll go to Roland then.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, wonderful. So I have 4 small questions. So I will try to be short to share the ground. So my first question is about the feedbacks of the group. So I get the point from Zeb and we interact already each other. So my understanding is that you have on the GitHub a stream of feedbacks from the group that test individually each forcing, but there is no room, as I see it, of a way or a forum for the group that have tested a bunch of forcing in a comprehensive way, and how far it changed the overall results of the model. So in a way, I'm just wondering if it is the role of the forcing task team to collect those feedbacks for the group that have tested in a comprehensive way a set of forcing emerging from your work, or do you need something else? So that's my first question. Second question is, I didn't see anything about the extension of the scenario. So I think it might be valuable to provide insight about the extension of the scenario, because it will be of great use for the IPCC assessment. And I think the last time the handshakes between the scenario up to 2100 and what is going next has been a bit lost in the process. So it might be good to have a clear radar on this, and I don't have feedbacks. So the third question is the same, but for the atmospheric forcing. So in the fast track, we have LMIP, which require atmospheric forcing. And as it stands now, I didn't see anything about the atmospheric forcing. So it is something that the forcing task team will take in charge, or is it something else? So if there is another route of communication with the group that will provide the forcing, it might be good to communicate this. And the last point is the recommendation in terms of labeling. So far in CMIP6, that was highly confusing between a group that use F1 and F2 when we lose track of the forcing generation. So do you have strict recommendation to use for the model that are ready to crunch the simulation with the forcing you've got, like the 7.0.1? Is it F1 or, yeah, so further guidance on this might be really helpful to prepare the workflow of the model as well. And with this, I'm done.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll try and bang through that. I'll scribble them down, but we might have to circle around on your questions. So the first one, feedback from groups. I would recommend that this is captured in GitHub discussions or put somewhere central, because the experience we had in CMIP6 was that quite a number of groups started using data sets, found problems, and there was email chatter that was going on, but it wasn't available to everyone that was starting to do things. And consequently, what happened is 3 people found the same issue, but someone else kind of wouldn't have had to have hit that issue if it had already been identified. So I think the more that we can centralize these conversations, the better off we are. GitHub is great for capturing information. We're going to have to do a pretty good job of trying to manage all this information. And I think at the moment in the discussions, for example, there's a number of discussions on previous versions of data sets. And so we might have to get into a situation where we kind of tag things as closed or something and then try and reopen things again. I think the more we can use that to centralize information, the better off we are. I don't really know how best to try and coordinate the information as it comes in, but importantly, I think putting it in one place would be a good thing to do. So if you guys have simulations at the moment, feel free to open up a discussion and start putting information in there. A key point tonight would be this one. Every single one of the data sets has its own version identifier, its own source ID. And I think one of the things that we're all going to have to be very careful about is that we actually identify what we've used, because there is going to be a situation where some issue is related to a specific version of a data set. And unless we actually explicitly say it was version 3.1 or version 4.6 or whatever, we're going to trip all over ourselves, and there'll be situations where there's not enough information for anyone really to interpret it. So I think we all have to be really diligent about making sure that we put enough information in there so that someone else can pick that up and start running with it and provide feedback specifically on things. That would be one point. And we'll try and guide this as much as we can. But I think if someone else sees it, and I'm in better sleep, feel free to chime in to say we need a bit more information. On GitHub, you can also edit things, which is great. So if something's not clear enough, you could go and rewrite it again in the morning when you've had your 3rd coffee or something. So I think that's question 1. The scenarios, I might leave to Zeb. The 3rd question was on atmospheric forcing. So you're talking about these community MIPS and LMIP in particular. I'm fully expecting that some of these required data sets that are serving the needs of the community MIPS, not the DECK, PI control historical primarily, will actually start to be made available. That's not been a remit of the forcing task team. We're happy to kind of provide some feedback here, but the community MIPS effectively are on their own to try and follow the templates that we have for the DECK data sets. AirChem MIP is the first of AirChem MIP 2, sorry, is the first of the community MIPS that has provided some data sets, and Jasper Koch at UCLA has actually provided that first dust emissions data set that's now available actually in input for MIPS 2. So I think those templates are quite good, and let's do what we did in CMIP 6 to try and reuse these templates as much as we can. If you wanted to open an issue on GitHub, if somebody wants to provide these data sets, then I can definitely interact, and Zeb will probably as well. And the more of us, the better off we are. There was a situation in CMIP 6 where CMOR was used for some data sets. That would also be available if people wanted to produce, gridded output. So again, circle around with me on that if somebody needs some guidance on that. We've actually got some templates in GitHub repos for that. Labeling simulation output, very good question. In CMIP 6, we tried to recommend that people, the way that I think about the forcing data sets is there is a collection. Simulations, a historical simulation or a PI control or whatever requires quite a number of different pieces, forcing data sets in order to comprise the collection that is used for a simulation. The concept of the collection is that 7.0.0 or whatever the number is. That is a useful way of trying to keep track of things, and we'll have the snapshots, for example, in GitHub that you could figure out, which version things were. To be honest, I reckon I'd want to keep track of all of these things. We've got the source IDs with version numbers, for example. So if it was me, I'd actually try and capture all that information and then associate that collection of forcing data sets with some kind of F number in your simulations. This ultimately comes down to the modeling groups to actually document. IPSL did a really good job. Tibut actually, one of the Forcing Task Team members, wrote a really nice paper that described that for the IPSL model configurations for CMIP6. That template is an excellent template that I think everyone should probably look at to think about how to capture information around CMIP7 simulations. I would strongly recommend that F number is something that you try and use really judiciously and then document it. But that's effectively a decision of a modelling group as to how you do that. I don't know if Vaishali's got some comments on that.
I think you covered pretty extensively, and I just put in the link the IPSL paper that TBOT documented for
That's great.
the IPSL. Thank you.
So Zeb, did you want to speak to the scenario
Yeah.
topic?
So one very quick point, Roland. What you see on GitHub's discussions are just the discussions that have been made. Feel free to make a new one for teams that have run everything. It's not a locked set. You can go and make as many discussions there as you want on as many themes as you feel like. And then, yeah, in terms of the scenario extension, there's a dedicated group within Scenario MIP who are thinking about this. And they're very aware that the handoff in CMIP6 wasn't ideal and that we can do it better this time. I don't know much more about it than that, and that they're thinking about it. But again, I'm assuming that's not a question that is at the top of our urgency list either. So I'll probably leave it there.
I'll just chime in. Garrett's made a comment about the F, this RIP F. So in CMIP 6, there were a number of groups that had an F1 or an F2 designation. I haven't seen an F3, but there might be one. One of the things that we need to be cognizant of, I think, is that there are a number of groups that then interpret the forcing data sets for their model. And so it means that ultimately what the model radiation scheme sees, for argument's sake, is not exactly the same thing across the different model configurations. Some of these granularities are something that we really do need to start thinking about. As I said before, Tibut's paper in the IPSL configurations was really nice. It kind of said, we took this version of the data set source ID, which is great, kind of keeps track of what came in, and we changed it around and did this, and so the model then interpreted it that way. I think, again, that template is a really, really good template to think about trying to put documentation around, how these forcing data sets have been implemented. There are some groups, for argument's sake, in CMIP6 that smooth data sets before they use them. Biomass burning was a case in point. We've anticipated that this time around, and there will be a smoothed version of the data set that is being made, which then means in SGF you'll have not that interim, it won't be the first data set, it'll be the smooth version that then can be used by groups, hopefully more directly. And there are a number of situations where we've anticipated these kind of steps that are taken before a modeling group actually starts using them. So again, discussions, if there's something that, interpreting the data in a certain way is being done by more than one group, then it might be possible, if we need to update a data set, to actually make that additional step, which means that then the groups, pick up data that is far closer. How you smooth, what is the temporal window of smoothing? It's all of those kind of questions are something that it would be kind of a good idea to figure out, is there a systematic way that we can bring the forcing data sets closer to the formats that modeling groups actually want to use? Okay, cool. So Jane's next, I think.
Hi guys, hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, thanks for the update. Really good progress, really great to see. I'm afraid I might be laboring the point on the labeling again, so apologies for this, but I think it is important. So coming from the in terms of our planning for running fast track simulations. So I was a little bit confused by, in terms of your tagging methodology of, I think you referred to it as maybe a 0.0 or a 7.01 versus a total, if there's something catastrophic wrong with something, that you then label it as a 7.1. And so I'm wondering, in terms of definition of what forcing data modeling centers should be using for fast track, will that tag or collection, as you seem to be calling it, will that be defined at some point, or is that up to, or is it just iterative and then we document what tag we used, what collection we used for our fast track simulations? Because I'm a little bit concerned that there's going to be potentially lots of small increments that we're really just not in a position to process and update so quickly that we can get that into our simulations. So will it be defined, I guess, in terms of, will there be an ultimate definition of what we should use, and when will that be defined by?
The answer is every single data set has its own unique identity. And if it was me, that's what I'd do. Because exactly as you said, you might have a situation where you've got your 10 data sets, everything's running, and then something goes wrong. And you identify there's a problem with the data set, you open a discussion, that turns into an issue. Someone goes, oh, hang on, that's right, we actually had a unit issue. Fixed data set, off it goes, off we go. You pick up that data set, you start running with it. Hopefully everyone else is kind of aware of what's going on because they're paying attention to the discussions. The collection versioning is something that we're tried to do in CMIP6, and we're going to try and do it again, to try and communicate when there are things that people need to pay attention to. I personally think that trying to watch the GitHub repo is going to be far better than emails. I don't know about everyone else's inboxes, but like it's kind of overflowing with stuff, and stuff gets kind of, hidden away in some kind of subfolder or whatever. The real advantage of the GitHub discussions and like the version release tracking, etc., is that you've actually got information when you want it, which I think is a better way to operate. But again, I think this collection versioning is just a way of trying to communicate information. When you're actually starting to use these data sets, the source IDs of every single data set is something that we're going to, I'd recommend you use. As an example, one of the advantages, because we've got these testing data sets, is that we actually have time histories, for example, of these different data sets and how they changed over time. The Solaris HEPA, the solar data, is a really good example. The very first version that we had published in ASGF was version 4.2. So it's Solaris-HEPA-CMIP-4-2. We now have a 4.6 version. And there's been incremental corrections and changes that have happened over time. So every single one of those increment changes is something that you can actually kind of track. The really nice thing about having many more eyeballs this time around was the fact that we found issues before that 4.1 actually got published in SGF. So we identified a problem, went, hang on a second, guys, we're not going to continue with the publication process. Stop. 4.2 was generated, and that was the first thing available. So the more eyes that we have on this, the better off we are. And then again, as I said, I think within a modeling group, focusing on the data sets that you're using, what we're going to make sure is anytime there is an update to a data set, the version number gets incremented. In CMIP6, we had a situation where in the SEDS data set, there was quite a number of streams of updates that happened. And what happened was there was a full collection of the SEDS data sets, which has quite a number of different species that it's tracking. There were some issues with a small subset. They were all updated with a new version number. And then the aircraft emissions had 2 go-arounds to try and get them correct. That kind of means that I think in CMIP6, we had 3 or possibly 4 different source IDs across the different data sets within the SEDS product chain. So I think, again, trying to make sure that you keep track of the data that you're using. If you're using these replication tools, it means that the directory structures that will be built out as all these data sets start to populate, you'll just get another directory, which is, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5. And you should be able to go back and actually, hopefully relatively easily, just toggle your versions to the latest version as someone else finds a problem. So we should be able to do this in a more systematic way. Now, does that actually answer the question or get to the
Let me
question?
jump in, Paul, with a bit of extra context, which might help. Let me see if I can share the right screen. So obviously all of these files come in as CDF files. If you dump them, you get obviously all this stuff. This is a land use change one. In every one of these files, there is a source ID. If it were me, every file you grab, I would get the source ID out and I would just write that in the output file of your model simulation. You'll have about 10 of them. It'll cost you 120 strings, whether you put it in every file or whether you put it in some master file, doesn't matter, but that will uniquely identify the forcings you used. So that is what I would do if I were you. I think we're going to struggle to create collections which capture the variety of choices that modeling groups make. I think really it's kind of up to you guys to just grab this string, that's your unique ID, and just keep track of the collection of strings, or keep track of the collection of source IDs.
Did you want to circle back around again, Jane, or is that good enough?
I think that's good enough for now. I think that's clarified. I think I was kind of envisaging that you were going to make a recommendation around a collection to use for fast track, but I think what I've interpreted from your response is that's not the case, and that it's up to modelling centres to kind of keep tabs on what they're running. Which is fine as long as we're clear on that that's what we need to do. So I think I think in terms of there's a little bit of scope there for confusion in terms of, because you're using, obviously the source IDs are very clear, but then the next layer of tags and collections might be misconstrued as you know. So I think that, but I think your response has been helpful. So thank you.
Well, I just chime back in. We don't have a version 7.0.0 yet because we don't have all the data sets in place. Everything is going to continue to populate. But when we did have everything that you need for the PI control the deck, then that toggle will happen, which just indicates, hey guys, come and get it basically. And at that point in time, we'll continue to to iterate over all the different data sets. If you have comments about this, clarity, etc., open a discussion, because I think honestly it would really benefit from some discussion around how people are doing this stuff. I think Tabut and the IPSL folks thought about this a lot with CMIP6, and again, the paper is linked in the chat. That to me is a great template to start thinking about trying to reuse. So Joachim, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I just had a quick question about the ozone data. I think for CMIP6, this was a 3-dimensional data set with monthly data. Is that also the plan for CMIP7? And it was mentioned that there would be higher frequencies. So does that mean daily data as well? Or what's the plan here?
I think Vaishali can answer this question better than I can.
Right. So the plan is to have both monthly and high frequency data. And I think the high frequency is 5-day averages are either daily or 5-day averages. I forget exactly, and I don't know if Michaela is here. If she can add. Eleanor, is she here?
No, she's not, but I'm pretty sure it is a 5-day average.
5-day average, right? Yeah. So consistent with what we provided in CMIP6, we would have the monthly mean 3D variables, plus the 5-day average variables as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Almost at time, but we've got time for another question or questions or any comments if anyone's got feedback they want to provide. I just took a peek at the Padlet and there's nothing really in there I think that needs to be addressed directly, but if anyone did want to raise questions, feel free to do so.
We'll leave the Padlet open for maybe a week, and then if any questions come to mind, then pop them in. We've noted down all the questions and answers that we've had today. So we can put that on the FAQ that we have, and it goes on the website, and make that available, link to the event web page as well. So we'll email this all out to everyone who's participated or registered for today. Last chance for any questions? No? Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you very much to our Forcing Task Team co-leads, Paul, Vaishali, and Zeb. Oh, Camilla's come in at the end. No? Oh, is that high five? All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone, and we'll make the information available soon.